Check the technique, see if you can follow it. Check the technique, see if you can follow it.
Okay, welcome to episode 2 of Check the Technique, and today I'm pleased to have my friend Pete Sasqwax with me. Pete does a lot of stuff with iOS sampley things and really dope beats. I've known him for a long time, and it's great to get him onto the podcast. So welcome, Pete.
Thanks, man. It's a pleasure to be on it.
How's things?
All good. Yeah, can't complain. Yourself?
Yeah, good. Yeah, just the usual sort of the run up to Christmas. People have been sending in lots of music to master. So, would you like to introduce yourself and tell me about you and what your thing is?
Yeah, that's a really difficult question to answer. I'm Pete Sasqwax. Years and years ago, 1999, started off releasing music as Waxfactor. Did some stuff on, did a track for Lex, did 7-inch on Seven Hills, 12-inch on Needlework, did an album on Needlework, other bits and pieces over the years. And then, I don't know, it's kind of life took a different course for a bit. And I don't know, after the Waxfactor stuff, basically what happened was we had a pressing and distribution deal with a company in America. And we'd prepped all the markets for sort of Europe and Japan, and they only sent CDs to like America, where nobody had a clue who I was. So this album kind of came out. I couldn't even get a copy over here, and it was all just a little bit. And then the label kind of went under after that. And it was around the time where all the labels that were sort of pressing vinyl and everything just kind of drifted away. There was a point where, I don't know, somewhere around the mid 2000s. Where it seemed like I knew just dozens of labels and there was loads of opportunities, and I kind of had this weird notion that that's how it was going to be forever. And then all of a sudden it wasn't like that anymore, and I didn't know any labels and I didn't have a label anymore, and I got kind of down about it all, and I wasn't even listening to music for a while. I'd kind of look at all the records that I got, and I couldn't decide, what I wanted to listen to, what I wanted to hear. And so I certainly wasn't thinking, this is what I want to make. Didn't make any music for probably a couple of years. Got quite a big family, so I got 5 children. So there's been a lot of points where making music wasn't the highest priority as well. But after a while, I kind of gradually moved back towards it, and it felt a bit weird to be going by the Waxfactor thing, which was a really corny name in the first place. It was just a daft,
I liked it.
Ridiculous fun. It was just like a sort of a playful, ridiculous sort of name. Not that Pete Sasqwax is any different, really. It's just a slightly different, ridiculous name, but it's got a bit more of my actual name in it, because obviously I am called Pete. So I kind of went for that a little bit more. I just thought, well, I'll own it a little bit more. I'll be a bit more me. And I couldn't use my actual name. This is a bit of a daft aside, but I couldn't really use my actual name for music, because my actual name, I've got a relatively famous cousin, or it's my dad's cousin, so it's my first cousin, second half removed, or I don't know what it is.
That's your second cousin, I believe.
So, is it? Is that right? I'm not sure how. Not sure if it was something removed or second cousin. So whatever. Yeah, my dad's cousin is pretty successful as a music producer. So I couldn't really use that, because I get contacted quite a bit. People wanting to interview him, that they think they've got him when they speak to me. And it's like, we'd really like to interview you for this magazine. And it's like, I'm convinced you probably don't want to interview me, but
If you wanted to know on the podcast, his second cousin is Paul Oakenfold.
You may have heard of him.
It's not really. Don't message him after this about that.
Message him as much as you want, I guess, but not about that.
So we've known each other for a long time, and that's probably via the Ninja Tune forum, which I guess 2000-ish to 2010, maybe some period like that.
It was a long time.
It was sort of our go-to place to avoid work and to speak to other musicians and beatheads. And there was a nice variety of people who were into sort of the Ninja Tune, which at the time was still doing sort of jazzy sort of hip hop vibes and stuff, and not so much what they're up to now. Although there was definitely areas where they were moving towards that, and they had a lot of their sub labels at the time. But it was just a really good place to find heads, and I guess there was other places at the time. There wasn't Reddit or YouTube communities,
or any of the social media stuff or anything like that. It was just on forums, wasn't it, about the whole time? And I ended up there after I started off on the Mowax forum. I was a bit of a Mowax nerd for a while, and I collected sort of all kinds of. It took me a while actually. I spent a lot of money and a lot of time collecting records, and then when I really listened back through to a lot of them, there wasn't a massive amount of them that I particularly liked. There was a lot of. I mean, the early Mowax records were painfully sort of, drum loops with sax on them, and it was like, that
was still quite new. Not new, but
true.
It was novel and nice, and
definitely, it just wasn't really my kind of thing. Whereas it was more the with the Ninja stuff. I can't remember how I came into contact with Ninja, but it was that stuff kind of felt a little bit more like, I'm more into this. And obviously, I knew about sort of cold cut and stuff like that. But not long after I started posting on the Ninja forum, the Warp forum closed. So loads of people who were on the Warp forum seemed to migrate over to Ninja.
It was a massive exodus, wasn't it?
Yeah, totally. And then that brought a lot more electronic sort of music around, which was really interesting. But I mean, I was kind of around that anyway, being in Sheffield. Or not, I mean, I'm in Barnsley, but I used to spend an awful lot of time in Sheffield. So the electronic element was always something that I was really into anyway.
So one of the things that got me into the Ninja Tunes sort of stuff was that cold cut Let Us Play. And if you remember...
Likewise, yeah, totally.
That came with a multimedia CD. And
absolutely.
On the CD, there was some sort of gadgets, I guess maybe like a pre-runner to the iOS type things. There was a lot of gadgets to create music and weird arty things. And I remember, so this is probably before a lot of the software that everyone uses today was really developed. I mean, at the time you could get Fruity Loops version 1. We're on 20 now, I believe.
Damn, that's insane. I've never actually used Fruity Loops.
It's rock solid as a sequencer.
Do you know what's really daft? Well, I used to. I was around a lot of the sort of scratch forums and all that kind of stuff. I got a lot of friends who were really heavily into the sort of scratch scene, and there was this kind of. It was almost, it was almost like a dismissive put down of like, what did you chuck that together in 10 minutes in Fruity Loops? And it was kind of
absolutely that it always has had that sort of derivative, not derivative.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't necessarily feel like Fruity Loops is no good, but I just felt like, well, at the time I was using Acid Music, which was I used forever. I used for way longer than was practical.
Me too, and Acid, I mean, Acid's still going, but it was a very simple loop-based. It was very easy to import stuff, and it was probably one of the first things with beat manipulators. So you could sort of time stretch things. It was good for knocking up acapellas and stuff. And I figure things like Dirt Chamber would have been perfect for Acid. I'm not quite sure how they did that in the end, but.
It's funny. I was thinking about this, sort of recently. We were talking about a friend of mine. We're talking about. You remember the Jive Bunny stuff?
Yeah, we are. I evoked that on a Christmas trip to the families the other day, actually. But yeah,
it's crazy though, isn't it? If you think about, actually, that would have taken quite some effort. I mean, irrespective of the end product, the technical expertise to put that together at the time would have been quite impressive, really.
Splices. I mean, it was of a level that I guess sort of Danny Krevit and all the Disco Masters would have been impressed
exactly.
about.
Yeah, totally. Which is, I mean, at the time you couldn't get any higher accolade. The fact was that the type of music that they chose and the way that they put it together was a really, really, sort of striving for pop, sort of top 40 kind of thing.
I mean, essentially they were Baby Shark of their generation.
Yeah, they were, but. Yeah, I mean, I'm by no means defending the content of the music, but the ability to put it together was something that was definitely impressive. And that kind of links into the cold cut thing as well. In terms of, I got the Let Us Play with the CD-ROM, and I mean, that was like it was a massive deal, wasn't it? You could get an enhanced CD.
That's right.
I remember one of the Wu-Tang albums was one, and it was really corny, but it was like
the second one.
It's really exciting. Yeah, that's right.
Wu-Tang Forever, I believe.
Yeah, and you'd stick it in your computer and it'd kind of come up with some really poor quality videos and stuff on there.
Really bad.
And that was about it. But it was still like, oh, this is amazing. This is the future.
I'm not sure if you ever found it, but on the Let Us Play, there's a one of the little beat machines they've got. There's a folder, and it says, "Please do not use these samples." So immediately we copy the samples over.
That's excellent.
And there's a really good batch of sort of breaks. I won't sort of tell on them a little bit, but
yeah. Was it from the Beats and Pieces stuff?
That's I think that there's Funky Mules on there and some other little slices of sort of the Atomic Moog 2000s sort of samples. And
do you know what? I bet I've still got that somewhere. I have to dig that out.
Dig it out. It's probably going to be. I mean, if it was 8-bit and 16 kilohertz, you would be lucky. I think they kept it down. Then again, this is before.
I can get with that though. I'm quite interested in in how that kind of stuff sounds these days.
You know, I think Real Media, wasn't it?
But Real Media was the thing. Yeah. Like I spent a lot of money on records purely on the strength of some Real Media streams.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I used to order the first time that I got a credit card. I did it to buy hip hop from like hiphopsite.com or or ATAC or whatever, and it was like this little I don't know 30-second real audio stream that sounded horrific. It was like you were sat next to somebody that was playing it on the phone.
But more importantly, it didn't take 2 hours to download.
No, it was almost straight away, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I guess we were still on dial-up probably. Or it was probably just
when I first got that, I was at the uni. I was using the uni thing. I'd never got my own sort of internet. At that point, it was like late, it was sort of 97 or something like that. So I would go to the university and use their computers, and it was like, oh, this thing's amazing.
Lightning. Yeah.
Well, I got my. It was around that time, when I went to uni, that I got my first Technics. But the other thing I got at the same time, I bought like a whole sort of Technics separate system. But I got it from Richer Sounds, and whenever you buy something from Richer Sounds, they would always fill like all the space in the box. They'd fill with like C90s. Which I just thought was like the best thing ever. And I lived just around the corner from Richer Sounds in Southampton at the time anyway. So we used to have all of these C90s, just make mixtape after mixtape. And that kind of, over the years looking back, I realized it's only quite recently that was such a massive part of it. I mean, there's a lot of sort of, pardon the pun, but there's a lot of noise made about using tapes and that these days. But for me, it definitely was. There was an element of, the music didn't really sound quite right if it wasn't on tape, because I wasn't like, it sounded all a bit too clean and crisp. It didn't really sound like, it sounded less real almost.
I guess also we were used to.
Real is such a loaded term, isn't it? But you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. We were used to growing up listening to stuff on tape. Obviously there was vinyl and CDs, but you'd dub off a tape and do your little like your mixtapes or your compilations, that type of stuff. So there's something about it, and I guess it's that compression.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. It was only when I got my first sort of proper separate system that I had level meters on there anyway. So I didn't know anything about, like really making it, clip and everything. I just thought like, well, if I hit it really hard, it sounds great. Like it makes a relatively tepid beat sound huge if I dub it on a, on a really sort of overdriven tape. So that was a large thing that I was really into as well. And that remains something that kind of, it's so ingrained, I can't really get rid of it. Not just the sort of, you tape a copy of your mate's tape and he'd tape it off his other mate who taped it off his older brother's vinyl. So it had gone through these sort of 3 or 4, these crappy tapes through like really sort of poor quality, MIDI systems or whatever. Before it arrived at you. So it had all this kind of like noise and hiss, and sometimes the tape would kind of get chewed up and you'd sort of fix it and stick it back in there. And it'd just have this weird quality that just felt like I knew that my version of that tape didn't sound like anybody else's version of that tape. It was like I could tell my, you'd know, like, careful with this next song because the tape snapped there and I had to stick it together. So,
starts phasing out and
it does some weird stuff. In terms of looking back at that era, there was all kinds of stuff in there that was like, well, nobody's really gone further than that for a long time. Like it took, arguably, you'd say it probably took until the emergence of the LA beat scene and that kind of thing before people took that kind of music in a different direction.
Push it somewhere nice, and yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. So influences, I guess we've sort of landed We've said a few of those, but is there anyone or any sort of things contemporary then? I guess like the LA Beats. Is there anyone in particular?
The stuff to be honest, the stuff that I'm listening to loads at the moment that I'm really, really kind of taking notice of is I've got quite bad tinnitus. So I tend to, as it gets sort of later on in an evening, I'll put on sort of ambient stuff and that kind of thing, just to sort of drown out the constant. They say the worst thing you can do with tinnitus is to actively listen to the sound.
Sure, drive you mad, right?
So yeah, exactly. So, and apparently it's sort of, perhaps it's psychological, but it effectively amplifies the volume of it. It makes it even worse. So I'll have like all kinds of ambient stuff and things like that. There's a few people who are doing some really interesting stuff with sort of tape loops and all that kind of stuff, with the weird sort of noise elements, and also with I'm really interested in granular synthesis as well. The way that you can use granular delays and all that kind of stuff to just totally
ethereal, sort of ethereally spaced, like ghostly.
Totally. And the thing is, it's through the iOS stuff actually that I first became able to do that stuff myself. I mean, in terms of artists that are doing that kind of stuff, I'm really interested in. There's a guy called Micah Frank from Brooklyn. He runs a label and a sort of software and sampling kind of place called Pure Magnetic.
I know those guys. They do a lot of Ableton packs and stuff. Right?
Exactly. I mean, he was massively involved in Ableton. I think he was sort of head of Ableton sort of sound design or something for a few years. And he's done some amazing stuff. So there's a massive influence there in terms of, what can be done with effectively abstract noise. And I love the idea of combining that kind of stuff with the sort of heavier beats and things that I've always been into. So that's like a massive influence. But where that came from in terms of a practical hands-on was through iOS apps. I've got a lot of friends who do that kind of thing with Modular and Eurorack and that kind of stuff. They've got make noise modules and whatever that they're doing granular stuff with. That's not a rabbit hole that I'm particularly looking to go down.
Sure.
I don't have the money, but also I don't really have the inclination to go into there. But on an iOS app, I can get an iOS app for sort of a tenner, and it could be there's some great ones. There's Tardigrade, there's Sampler, there's Quanta, Spacecraft. There's and they all do something slightly different. But the idea of just being able to take little grains of sound and create a whole new sort of synth voice with that is massively appealing to me. It's almost like taking the idea of cut and paste to the most sort of furthest extreme, or certainly the first extreme that you can get to at this particular stage.
I guess like the microcosm, isn't it? It's the
totally
magnification to the smallest sample.
Absolutely. Sort of. I mean, the thing was when I started off, when I first sort of started picking my own music, the first thing that I bought, I remember I had a W.H. Smith's voucher and I bought a tape called Hip Hop and Rapping in the House. And it's like a Telstar compilation. I've probably still got it. It's one of those things where, it did have such a kind of a huge significance for 10-year-old me that I was like, yeah, I'm never going to get rid of this. And I'm sure I haven't. It had all stuff like, it had Eric B. and Rakim, it had bits of, it had Mars Pump Up the Volume, it had some Run DMC. But the reason that I got it was on the advert, and it was like on a sort of a 30-second TV advert, it had Tell You Fresh, the show, which had obviously the Inspector Gadget bit on it. And that to me was the first thing that I thought, like, this is music that's for me. This is like, my parents wouldn't get this. They don't even know Inspector Gadget is. And I was like, but why is Inspector Gadget on this song? You know what I mean? I couldn't,
sure.
I couldn't wrap my 10-year-old brain around the whole thing, but I was interested in it. I got it. I loved that tape and I play it loads. But I realized before that, I was really into like TV sci-fi, which looking back on it probably would have been Radiophonic Workshop stuff. The kind of the weird, like Music Concrete kind of style. Yeah. So that was a big influence in terms of, what I really enjoyed the sounds before I could even put into words, this is music. It was just like, I really like those sounds. And then I got into the hip hop stuff, and then sort of gradually, I guess the next, I followed the hip hop thing, sort of all the way through. But the next point where something really kind of grabbed hold of me was when Tom from Lex was, before he'd actually launched Lex, he sent me some stuff up from Warp, and he sent me a package that contained the first Prefuse EP, the Astro Caro EP, and there was a sampler 12 for the first album. There was the Correct Technique EP and Two Lone Swordsmen Virus with Shoes EP. And this package arrived, and it was just like, it was I still don't think he grasps how huge that was to me to receive that package. And I sat down over this weekend and just digested it all, and I was like, this is amazing. This is it. I can see that it's hip hop, but it's definitely not. Like, a lot of people wouldn't say, oh yeah, this is hip hop. They wouldn't connect it to hip hop. And the idea of this, the sort of the micro sampling that Prefuse was doing, is basically, I see that as like part of the lineage of the granular thing, and that kind of, to me, that's where I kind of, so, okay, we took it, taking people's voices as a small fragment, and that became a cloud of atmospheric sound amidst all the beats and stuff for the Prefuse thing. Taking it even further, you can just take, it could be a voice, it could be, somebody's a single key or anything at all, and then create an instrument from that using the granular synthesis. It was just like, wow. So it's been a couple of years that I've been playing around with that, and that started creeping in a lot more to what I'm doing. But more just in the background at the moment. It's more very much like I use it as effectively like a sound bed. But that kind of stuff came from not knowing an awful lot about music. So when I'd originally, the whole idea of, I got really good at programming drums because I could just sit down and work that out on my own. And I'd start off and I'd get a drum loop and I'd chop that down to the component parts, and then I'd try and rebuild a different drum loop using those sounds. And I'd I'd make sure I got the hits in the right place, and I'd figure out, oh look, that snare's a little bit off, like on the 2 and the 4 or whatever, it's all it's a bit wonky, whereas the 1 and the 3 is hitting bang on beat, and and you kind of figure out how to get swing in there and that kind of thing. But then I could add a bass line to it, because that obviously there was no other notes to compete with. But when it came with, like, okay, so I could put chords and stuff over there. That's what I'd do if I was a musician. But I didn't know anything about music, in that sense. I knew how to stitch sounds together, but I didn't really know what music was kind of all about. And I had mates that were in bands, but I wasn't going to ask them because it was like, I'm going to figure this out on my own.
Well, so it's a different field, isn't it? So it feels like it's the sort of the learning process. So I guess most people doing digital stuff, well, maybe more so than the bands, are just figuring it out themselves. Yeah. You get, every now and then you get people who are, I don't know, like pianists or something when they were kids, and they sort of swim when it comes to doing the music stuff. But where there wasn't a sort of a field already there for people to sort of gravitate to, and everyone was sort of just learning and making it up for themselves. I guess like sort of the early computer software era sort of led to that,
Yeah, totally. It was all about kind of, right, here you go, you can do whatever you want with the sounds that you've got, but there's no real kind of rules for it. So then you start throwing things together and you realize, oh, that sounds really discordant, but not in a way that I particularly like, so that's not right. So then I found it so difficult at first to kind of fit together bass lines and other sort of notes and things like that I would literally make music out of drums and bass. And because it sounded really sparse, and people were saying, "Oh yeah, I really like that's really stripped down and everything," and I was like, "Yeah, it's not really my intention." Yeah. But then I started building up a lot more of the sort of textures and stuff behind it, because I was like, well, I can keep it interesting to me at least if it's got the drums and the bass, but I've got all sorts of like bits of field recordings or just like little atmospheric noises and stuff that I've got going off in the background. So I became a lot more interested in that kind of thing. And lately I've kind of come full circle on that, where I've learned an awful lot more about chords and that kind of stuff, and I do understand a lot more music theory over the years. But now I'm choosing to take the beats away almost at points. I'm doing quite a bit of ambient stuff that I've not really done anything with yet, but I will kind of put out there. In fact, I've done a few videos that I'm going to upload of doing that kind of thing on the iPad, because it kind of lends itself really well to that. Where you can just kind of sit there and lose yourself for a few hours and just come up with some really, really sort of interesting textured ambient stuff.
Your YouTube is Beat Cult, so that's Pete Sasqwax Beat Cult,
yeah.
if you're searching for it. And you've been doing a lot of really good sort of tutorial things for Koala, which I guess is what, a sampling app?
Yeah, I mean the thing about Koala was I kind of stumbled upon Koala, and I don't think it had been out all that long when I kind of found it, and I couldn't believe like for £4 I could get on my I've got a sort of a series of old sort of iPhones and that kind of thing, but it worked on an iPhone 6 that I had at the time, and it meant that I could do basically a kind of a combination of the PO33 KO and the SB404 kind of workflow, but it had its own sort of identity at the same time, and it was really, really quick to use. But I kind of felt like people were not quite realizing how good it was. Like I was almost sort of that sort of door-to-door knocking to tell people how amazing it was level, and I felt like, well, obviously I'm not gonna do that. That would be a bit weird. But the next best thing I could do to kind of spread the word and let people know is just to kind of show them like how good it is, and like, oh, by the way, this is £4. If you've got an iPhone, why would you not have this? Or an iPad or anything else. So that was the initial reason for making the videos, and that's why I'd had friends who were saying, you should do this kind of stuff. You should make some videos and sort of show people how you work. And I've always been like, yeah, I will do one day, but I never got around to it. But this was sort of the catalyst for doing it. I just thought, well, it kind of ties in. It doesn't feel as self-conscious if I'm just going, look, this app's really, really good, and this is what you can do with it. And by the way, this is what you can do with iOS devices these days. And you don't need to be going out there spending loads of money on like an OP1 or an Electron box or whatever, MPC or anything like that. If you want to genuinely make music, there's absolutely no reason you couldn't make an album with a £4 sampler app.
What else is good on iOS? I've seen the Korg things, which I've been sort of lusting over because I don't have any iOS like hardware, and I saw that Korg did a massive suite of plugins and effects. And
now there's some interesting stuff that Korg do. I mean, I started off, the first thing that I got, I think, on iOS, I got given an iPhone 4, obviously quite a lot of years ago. But I mean, it was all, when I got it, it was kind of, here, you can have this because it's no use as a phone almost.
Sure.
So I got that, and I had a look at what was available, and there was a Moog had done an app called Animoog, which was just this amazing synth app. And it, as far as I could see, and I wasn't deeply into sort of synths at this stage, but as far as I could kind of tell, it was doing things that none of their actual physical hardware synths were capable of doing.
What does the Animoog do that maybe the hardware stuff wasn't
right? The thing that first kind of jumped out at me was you can specify scale. So if you want to work in a particular mode, you can specify that, and then it'll only display the on-screen keyboard with the notes that are in that particular scale.
Would it lock out the bad notes in?
Yeah, it just doesn't even display them. It's literally like it removes them from the screen. It's amazing. So like your physical keyboard will look different depending on what scale there is. If there's no if there's no sort of sharps or whatever on there, that'll be gone. You'll just have a completely blank section on that as far as that goes, which was amazingly useful for me in terms of finding my way around these kind of things and working out what goes with what. But the other thing it did was it did the MPE stuff, where you can have expression added to your MIDI notes. So, for example, if you've got the length of the key, if you move to the top of the key, you almost have it like a volume slider. So you've got your fingers on the notes, and then if you move it up, you're also simultaneously bringing the volume of it. The amplitude raises the higher that your fingers go.
It's almost like the keys are an XY pad almost, where you can
absolutely. It's like a real performance instrument. Which was just amazing to me. I was really, really impressed with that.
Does it still work with MP? Like, could you use that and then send the MIDI of that towards something else which has MPE?
Yeah, you have to have there's an in-app purchase where you can unlock that keyboard to use with whatever MIDI, iOS MIDI devices you want, and it works perfectly with that. So I got that. I initially got I got like a Mellotron thing or something, and I was already aware that people were selling off the old 30-pin devices, like the accessories and stuff you could get really cheaply. So I got that, the iPhone 4, and I got this Akai synth station thing that you basically just plugged the phone into, and then it became like it gave you a MIDI keyboard, which that was pretty cool. That was like next to nothing. So I picked up some things like that, and then I found the Moog Filtertron app, which gives you basically like the ladder filter. But I use that with one of the iRig things where you can send the audio in and then use it as a ladder filter and send it back out. So you could use that like you would an effects pedal or whatever. So that was awesome as well, that kind of thing. And then I added something else. Like my wife got an iPad, a 3rd generation iPad, and then she had that for a few years and she kind of got bored of it. And then I ended up getting that. And then by that time there was some more interesting apps. The one that I particularly really like that I use an awful lot now is an app called Patterning, and the company that makes that's Olympia Noise Co. And they have there's another app called Cordian. Do you remember the I think the Suzuki Omnichord?
Yes, they're going for a lot of money at the moment. They've become trendy again.
Totally, the coolest little thing. Cordian's a little bit like that, where you have you've got little hexagons that you can sort of see with your left hand. Effectively, you can play chords with your left hand, and then the notes that comprise that scale are along the side with your right hand. So you can effectively, play the chords and the component notes with the other hand.
Did you used to have a Bontempi when you were a kid?
I've still got one under my youngest son's got one under his bed.
Amazing.
And it was the conversation that we've been having about these mics. That's one of the first things I'm going to mic up with it and see what it sounds like.
I did that with the one that basically we had one, and it would only come out at Christmas, and we'd have the Christmas Carol book, and of course it's numbers rather than notes, which it was easy. I mean, it made it really easy as a kid, but in hindsight, if it was the notes, I'd have been a much better musician right now. So thanks, Bontempi.
Yeah, thanks, Bontempi. Cheers for that. You just keeping us down.
The left side of the Bontempi had those auto chords. And they were menacing. They were like a really growly sort of sound. So it turns out that those early Bontempis are electroacoustic.
Oh, really?
Because it's using a fan.
Well, yeah, I suppose so. It's almost like a melodica sort of thing, isn't it?
Exactly that, yeah. So there's the fan's generating the thing, and when you press the key, it's letting the... Imagine a straw and you've just snipped out like a little mouth. Something. But I did try to record someone's multi-sample up, so record every note and all the auto chords. The amount of hiss... Because the little speaker's not so great, and the amount of hiss I was getting off it... I mean, some people like hiss, but it was too
There's
noisy.
a limitation. I like to be under control. I like to be able to control the amount of hiss that there is.
Absolutely.
I do like it, but you know what I mean? It's kind of, I like to be able to kind of tone it down when I want to.
It should be your choice and not...
Yeah, if it's imposed upon me too much, then it's... But that could also be something really interesting to put through the granular stuff.
Because that's all extra information for it to...
Yeah, exactly. So if it could be, you could just take a little tiny element of the hiss as part of a wider sound. Because you can specify how many grains you want to take out of each sort of sample. So if you've got like a single note from the Bontempi, you could take, you take dozens of little grains of it, and some of those could be the hiss, which will work really nicely.
Well, I'll send you what I have. I'm sure I've got them somewhere.
That would be amazing. Like I was, my youngest son is an amazing singing voice, and he's part of the local youth choir. And when he goes there, I'll have sort of a couple of hours while he's in there sort of doing his singing stuff, where I'm just sort of sat effectively in a waiting room. And that's one of the times when I'll just sort of sit there with the iPad and just kind of play around with stuff. And I quite like just capturing the noise print of where I am and sort of using that as a granular basis as well, where I'll just record the mic and it captures the room. It's quite noisy. There's loads of other sort of parents and younger siblings and whatever hanging about. And then you can just do all kinds of stuff there. Just literally, it's real world sounds. If I didn't capture that particular moment, in a moment afterwards, it's not going to be the same. Do you know what I mean? The sounds that I'll get, somebody will be saying something different or whatever. And it's just like luck of the draw. You'll get whatever you get. But I love that kind of stuff. And I love the whole, the idea of going around and capturing sounds and then chopping those up and processing them in interesting ways. And I do feel like the iPad opens up the possibilities for that massively. For me personally, I mean, I know you can do all that kind of stuff on your PC, but I got to a point where I kind of felt like it became a little bit stale and sort of dull when I sit down in front of Ableton, purely because, and this is not, I appreciate this is a shortcoming of mine, not of Ableton's, where what had happened was I started off with acid music, and then I'd stuck with that for so long. And because it was just, your classic linear left to right sequencing thing, when I went over to Ableton eventually, I just stayed on that view. So I never used the session view. I just stayed with arrangement view all the time. And the session view I'd use it if I was playing live and triggering clips and loops and that kind of thing. But if I was actually making a song, I'd just be in the classic left to right. And I got so sick of that classic left to right approach. It just felt like everything that I was making was absolutely rigidly on rails. And it became really depressing to kind of, I've got to go through, I'm going to sit there and after 4 bars, this is going to happen. And after 8 bars, this is going to happen. And I didn't want any of that at all. I just wanted to kind of feel my way through it and see what came out.
My experience, with Ableton is the session view, is that the clips or the normal door? So when I saw that, I didn't even know that it had the sort of classic door interface. I was just sort of stuck on that clip section, and I could see the beauty of it, of just like getting ideas down and being able to grab them and sort of preview them quickly, because before that we were all on our sort of left to right things. But I still, when I did find the sort of the arrangement view, it felt horrible. I mean, it's much better now, but at the time it felt like there was 5 or 6 other doors I'd go to first rather than sort of do it there. And then watching people, and I watch tutorials now, people doing Fruity Loops, and they don't use the step sequencer, and they're just dragging things into the arrangement thing. And that's like crazy talk to me. Like, I'm watching, what are you doing? But
I know,
it's evolved to sort of lend itself.
See, I did that for years and years. This is the thing, and we were talking the other day about the Launchpad, and how there's that Launchpad 95 script that allows you to use a step sequencer, much like the push with an Ableton. So I resolved to, okay, what I'm going to do is I've got at least sort of 5 years worth of unreleased or unfinished music that I've made in Ableton. I'm going to get all that rendered down into sort of 4 or 8 bar loops, and then dump it all onto the iPad and just delete it off my computer. So I've not even got it in Ableton to mess with. And then start completely afresh with Ableton once I've finished all of that stuff on the iPad. And then find some kind of hybrid way of working where whatever's the iPad's best for, I'll use it for that. And whatever Ableton's best for, I'll use it for that. But then really learning Ableton almost sort of from the point of, let's act like I've never seen it before. And let's do some of the online tutorials or whatever and figure out how to get the most out of the session view and the step sequence and everything like that. Which is something that I'm really kind of, it's daft because I could do it now, but I've been really kind of strict about, no, I have to get this stuff finished off. Otherwise, I know that I'll just ditch it forever. All these kind of, I've got about, I don't know, say 50 tracks that I just never quite finished.
Will this be the Sasqwax stuff, or is it, do a different alias for different sort of vibes, or?
No, I mean, at this stage, it'll be all the Sasqwax stuff. And it's stuff that, like I say, it probably goes back 4 or 5 years. And during that time, there's been points where I haven't been making a vast amount of music. I stopped my job and trained as a teacher, and there's been all kinds of stuff that kind of went off over the past sort of 3 or 4 years. That have meant that sometimes I've been really productive and other times I've not been all that productive. But the one thing that it all had in common was that I never really saw anything through unless I absolutely have to. Like if I had a deadline placed upon me, then that's no problem. But if I didn't have a deadline, if it's just down to me, this whole idea of you can, you just put it up on Bandcamp whenever you want to. And it's like, well, yeah, I could do that. Or I could just, carry on doing what I'm doing and sort of playing around. And this is where a lot of people who go, it's much better now that you can just, you can go on Bandcamp and you're your own thing. It's great that you can bypass all the labels. To me, maybe if you're on a sort of from a major's perspective and you've had experience of labels who are doing sort of underhanded things, then okay, fine. But I only had experience of indie labels who were effectively more or less losing money in order to put out music they believed in. Yeah, and I happen to be one of the people they believed in. So I've had nothing but sort of thanks and praise for them for doing that. But the other thing that I found great was that they did impose some form of deadline. We want to release this then, which I found really helpful for me. But the other thing was that the benefit of an A&R, where somebody can go, what about this? Or have you thought about putting that track there instead of here? Or and that kind of stuff, and having somebody else's ears that you trust. just makes such a massive difference. And being without that for a while meant that I wasn't massively productive. I just seem to be the type of person who works so much better in that kind of structure. Yeah, and with external ears, they're sort of helping me out, saying, yeah, maybe knock this part of the track on the head, or try doing this with it, or whatever. The whole thing about, I mean, I was really fortunate where I kind of, everybody that I've ever worked with as far as music went have approached me about, we'd like you to do something for our label. And I kind of got this weird point that was just how it was always going to work. So I've never really sent music out to people. I've given music, sort of CDs to mates. And one of the 7-inch that I did came from giving a CD to a mate who owned a record shop, which in a roundabout kind of way was a bit like sending off demos, because it was just like, well, I'll give this to my mate and he'll just end up probably playing it. And if he likes it, he might play it in the shop and, whatever, who knows. But I wasn't thinking of that. I was just like, well, he listens to loads of music and he knows what I like. So maybe if I give it to him, he'll give me some honest feedback of like, well, it's really good, or it's not all that good, or, whatever. And things kind of just sort of appeared like that. And I had this weird sort of distorted image of, well, that's how the music sort of industry or on my level works, where people just get in touch and go, we really like this, we want you to make some music. So when it came to actually releasing your own stuff on Bandcamp and then not having people whose job it was to kind of go out there and sell it for you, all of a sudden I found how awkward that is. Like, oh, please come and buy my music, come and listen to my music.
It was such an
alien thing. Yeah, it was such a weird thing to do, and I didn't want any of them to pay for it. It was just kind of like, yeah, have this. And like, oh no, I don't want to make you pay for this kind of stuff. And I found that kind of relationship really bizarre. I really enjoyed the making of the music, and I can be really sort of proactive in terms of promoting other people's music that I believe in and really rate. And I'm quite happy to, sort of wax lyrical about something that I've heard and I really believe in. But in terms of my own music, it's just kind of like, oh, I did this. Have a listen if you want. And then that's it. Just find it almost impossible to promote.
So when it comes to finishing songs, I guess iOS isn't probably the best thing. Do you go back to the DAW to sort of finalize song structures and doing the final 2-track export?
It depends. Actually, I've found that the way that I really like working on the iOS stuff is just to do it to a 2-track master, and I'll use AUM, or I call it OM, which is effectively it's an audio and MIDI mixer. So you can load in audio devices or MIDI devices, and you can send, you can use sort of, I tend to create a few channels with some loops that I've made from different apps. So stuff that I've made in Koala might end up as a loop that's running in there. And then I'll assign a MIDI controller to control the levels of each channel. And I'll just effectively almost perform it like you would a dubstep set. So, the classic, plenty of delays and all that kind of stuff, and I'm kind of bringing stuff in and out. And that feels like a much more interesting way of doing it. But the iOS stuff really lends itself quite well to that, because of that one particular app. And that allows me to connect all the other things that I do in one place and control them with one controller, and then save the whole mix as a 2-track master. And then if it comes to a point where I think actually it would be better served by sort of sticking that onto the PC and doing stuff with it, I can do exactly the same thing effectively with an Ableton if I needed to. But at the moment, I'm really quite pleased with the stuff that I'm getting just straight off that. But the nice thing about it as well is I can record it straight into Ableton via the mixing desk, and I've got loads of guitar pedals and all that kind of stuff, and I can send stuff out, and I can also synchronize multiple iOS devices and send them through different effects chains of their own. So it's like having a large hardware studio when I've got sort of, 5 or 6 different iOS devices of various ages that I can link together. There's a thing called Ableton Link, which means that everybody can, like all the devices can be synced in one particular session. So one device can be purely supplying the drums, and that can be running through one channel on the mixing desk, and then another device can be providing chords or whatever, and then it can all be synced through one master device that's then sending the MIDI clock to everything else. which is just unbelievably powerful. And the way that allows me to, like, I've got quite a collection of guitar pedals that I like to run different things through, so I can have everything running all on iOS, but have the flexibility of being able to just turn the dials and everything and change everything in real time, which is just, honestly, it's like kid in a candy shop stuff. There's so much opportunity for actually manipulating stuff, and it takes it so far away from the idea of it being on rails for me, which is where it becomes really exciting again, which is where I was looking to take it when I decided actually I'm just a little bit jaded on this left to right sort of classic DAW approach.
Do you use VSTs or what's the Apple equivalent? The AU?
Yeah, AUV3. Yeah. Honestly, I'm an absolute fiend for them. I've got a ridiculous amount, and I genuinely dread to think how much money I've spent on apps. But the thing that I have discovered is that because I've got devices that go sort of all the way back to iPhone 4, iPad 3 and 4, which are on sort of iOS 9.3, I think is the earliest. It's a case of finding the most effective sort of streamlined app that'll do what you need it to do. And there's a range of stuff on there that's sort of a couple of quid for chorus pedals or flanges or whatever else that give me exactly what I'm looking for in a really sort of effective little package. But that goes all the way up to you've got your Eventide space and black hole reverbs and all that kind of stuff, which are the other end of the spectrum, which give you effectively what you're getting in a really expensive pedal or a piece of external gear for that's what, 15, 20 quid, which is just, it's outstanding. The quality of some of the stuff on there is just, it's unreal.
Is there anywhere the listeners can find your stuff, social media and that type of thing?
Yeah, I'm basically I'm either at Sasqwax or at Pete Sasqwax on everything. So on Facebook you find me easily enough, on Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, all of them kind of places, and they all kind of link back to each other, so it's quite easy to find any of that kind of stuff. There will be loads more that I've got. A mate of mine just recently gave me a GoPro, so I'm able to make videos. I was trying to use my SLR camera to make videos of sort of doing the iPad tutorials with guitar pedals and stuff, but trying to mount a DSLR, sort of high above an iPad or whatever, is a total nightmare. So he gave me a GoPro, which is great. So I'm going to start making videos of that kind of stuff, and using guitar pedals and stuff with the iPad. But also, I recently got an iPad 4. I got an iPad 4 for like a tenner. I think I spent like £8 on the case for it or something daft. So it's this kind of stuff's so ridiculously affordable, and I'm making videos with the GoPro using that, because you can't actually do the screen recording on devices that are that old.
Are you going to give yourself a deadline for a release in the near future?
Yeah, I've got to. Basically, I mean, I'm hopefully in January I'm starting a master's degree in music research, which is going to be going into effectively degradation and sort of lo-fi aesthetic as a choice. Not lo-fi as a genre, but the idea of kind of what we're talking about with tape degradation and the 8-bit samplers and 12-bit samplers and that kind of thing. But that's going to take a lot of time. So I can't really. I'm going to have to kind of impose quite a strict deadline of effectively January to really get all the all the stuff that I've got on the iPad off and in a state that's ready to go. So yeah, effectively in my mind I've got the end of January as being like the deadline. But at this stage I've got literally sort of between 40 and 50 track sort of collections of elements of tracks, where most of them are sort of they've got clearly defined beats, bass, atmospherics, sort of a few synth tracks and all that kind of stuff. They're all effectively ready to go as 4 and 8 bar loops that I'm then going to process on the iPad and create songs out of. But what I'm doing mainly is, whilst a lot of it's just in terms of processing and sequencing on the iPad, the drums especially, I'm breaking the drums apart and I'm obsessed with patterning. I cannot praise that app enough. And I'm using the old version of patterning on an iPad 4, and it still works amazingly well. and the new version patterning too on the newer iPad that I've got. And the difference between the two is fantastic. But even the older version it does incredible things. The control that you've got over that is I can't really think of anything else like it.
Is it stuff like beat repeat and that type of thing, or?
It's effectively no, it works in a totally different way. So you've got you've got 8 sample banks effectively that you can load. I mean, effectively, I'm using them as drums, but you can load melodic elements in there as well. And then you've got it's laid out as a circle. So you've got one bar broken down into 16. So you've got 16 little segments in this circle. So then you program that each layer, each sample has got layers on it. So you can then have it set to. You can randomize how each layer plays. So you can set a sequence in there, but you can have it playing, sort of
round robin with other samples.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. So you can have all 8 of them doing that, and they never quite hit. Or you can have 7 of them doing it. What I quite like doing is having 7 of them doing a little bit of a kind of a random approach. And then let's say the kicks, for example, I would have as the consistent element that locks it together so that stops it being a bit too kind of abstract and out there.
Sure.
But then you can do all kinds of things where you have a probability element where, like, I might have hi-hats on every other hit, but then in between I'll put a quieter hi-hat, and then I'll put the probability up to about, let's say, 70 or 80%. So yeah, most of the time the ones in between will hit, but there's a chance that some of them won't. And it gives you this really nice this sort of movement to it, and you can automate the filters on the same basis. So I might have I might put effectively a filter envelope on there, and it might be a 50% filter on it on the hi-hats, and then I'd have the probability of that being, let's say, 50%, so that then it's constantly, each hit becomes unique all the way around. And then you've got global swing to adjust, or you can do just the swing on that particular sample. What it's capable of is absolutely mind-blowing. And that, to me, that gives me the access to the kind of stuff that you get from the Electron boxes, the Digitact and Octatrack and all that. I can't warrant going down that kind of avenue, but this gives me something that's a whole different approach. That is the reason that I hear people praising those kind of boxes, especially, and I can see the attraction if that's what they give you the facility to do. But for me, doing it on the iPad is just perfect.
Oh, great. Well, thank you ever so much for speaking to us. Go check them out on social media and things. And hopefully I'm going to be doing some more of these podcasts soon. I've been really slack since the last one. So keep an ear out for it. And I'll catch you guys soon. Peace.
Check the technique, see if you can follow it. Check the technique, see if you can follow it.
Check the Technique is sponsored by Cosmic Trigger Audio, mastering for perfection. So you just finished making the dopest beat and you want to have the ill mastering to take your mix to the next level? Cosmic Trigger can take your baby and put it into the same league as the greats, mastering for radio, vinyl and streaming. Go to Facebook, Cosmic Trigger Audio, and quote, "I'm down with CTT" to get 10% off your first 3 masters.